I started teaching a history of psychology course a couple of weeks ago, and the course begins with a consideration of some ideas from ancient times that we can see in psychology today in various forms. There's a great reading to set this up. If you're starting a course like that far back, and I'd like to just show you a reading that we've been using. There's this great old book called Historical Conceptions of Psychology, edited by Mary Henley and one of my teachers, Julian Jaynes, and John Sullivan. And one of the chapters in this book is an article by Robert MacLeod called Five Classic Doctrines of Man. And it's a provocative reading for students today, and I've just had some experience with that with my own students. Very briefly, MacLeod's five classic doctrines are these: uh, relativism, which he associates with the philosopher Protagoras. This is the idea that different people can have different perspectives on things, and that um, reality is more fluid than uh, our impressions of it would lead us to believe. Materialism is the idea that everything is just like a cause and effect machine. One thing causes another, um, and that's all there is to it. He associates that with Democritus. Then there's the idealistic uh, doctrine, which we associate with Plato. Remember, Plato had the idea that the world we see around us consists of just imperfect copies of ideal forms, and that the ideal forms exist in another realm. Aristotle's philosophy is complex, but MacLeod MacLeod's fourth doctrine is he calls teleological, and specifically that relates to Aristotle's idea that things grow to fulfill themselves, that there's a purpose in the changes that we see around us. And then finally, there's a religious doctrine. He's talking mostly about the Christian worldview here, but broadly speaking, religions represent another approach to understanding the world and human beings' place in it. So those are the five doctrines. And my students read this piece in the second week of the course, and their reactions were interesting. They were, some of them were alarmed that there could be such different ways of looking at human experience, and a little bit confused, mostly confused over the question whether these different doctrines could be combined. And it's not a course on philosophy. We haven't pursued that very far. We could note that some combinations are fairly easy. There's a strong Platonic thread or an idealistic thread that we find in Christianity, for example, and the dualism that goes along with that view is recognizable in many religions. But the the reactions of the students seem to suggest that they were expecting different doctrines of human nature that could be tied to modern psychology, that somehow they would be more consistent with each other and not seem so wildly different. Um, Now, each of those doctrines was chosen because MacLeod felt he could identify ideas in modern psychology that were traceable back to those ways of thinking in the ancient world. And that's good. I mean, that helps us to understand the historical context of some of our ideas, like uh, behavior and the causes of behavior. There's sort of a materialistic thread there that we can trace back a long way. Um, or the idea of projection in uh, psychoanalysis and clinical psychology generally. It's one of the defense mechanisms that Sigmund and Anna Freud wrote about. But projection is traceable back to that relativistic doctrine that, to some extent, uh, what we see in the world is a projection of our own beliefs about the world, our own needs and motives, and it's the idea that often we see what we want to see. So there is a sense to that article, and that's the reason I chose it as a reading. But my students' confusion and sometimes real apprehension about these very different ideas seem to is quite striking to me in their discussions of it. And I wanted to suggest a way of thinking about uh, philosophies, doctrines like MacLeod's list of 5 doctrines, or even ideological positions that seem very different. And the the idea that I'm going to propose is that there's a kind of tunnel vision that comes along with any philosophy or ideology or theoretical position. Uh, the the ideology or the philosophy may be based on a really good insight, and that insight may be very useful for explaining some of the things that we want to understand. But it's very difficult for us, especially if we are the generators of something that we are attached to, like an idea or a philosophy or a theory. It's very difficult for us to see the gaps in our own understanding. It's like this idea that we don't know what we don't know, quite literally. So uh, you can approach any one of these philosophical positions as being like kind of a tunnel, and the creator of the tunnel having a limited vision, really great vision within the tunnel, but also missing some things that the tunnel doesn't provide a view of. And I think understanding that as a way of uh, reconciling how such different approaches can coexist is a useful part of our education. And it's a useful step toward being tolerant of other people's ideas. We may not accept those other ideas. We may not find that those other ideas explain the world in a satisfactory way to us. But to understand that differing ideas arise because of perspectives, and that perspectives are often limited because they can't see what's outside of themselves. I think that's a useful insight.